In November 2021, Fiona Beal told everyone that her boyfriend of 17 years, Nick Billingham, had ran away with another woman. Seemingly devastated, Beal accepted sympathy from everyone around her, even Nick's family. Nobody expected that merely 4 months later, his mummified body would be found buried in his own back garden, whilst Beal was nowhere in sight. This is a sadistic and terrifying case of Fiona Beal. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. Today's case is one that I followed. I followed for lots and lots of reasons. Ultimately, I really wanted to get into the depths of the case and the essential defense that was going to be used, just to see whether we were looking at a woman who'd been terribly abused, who just snapped, or whether there was something mental health orientated, or maybe something just plain sinister. Hopefully today, if you know about this case, I will illuminate it for you further. Also, for those of you who watch me on the regular here, just so you know, I'm now starting to release an extra video every single week on my membership platforms, and also regular content, which is just about crimes that are coming up and being tried that haven't actually got verdicts. Trying to do so many more things for my membership so that you really do benefit from helping me by giving me your support as you do. So if you haven't joined and you fancy checking out that extra content, now's a great time to do so. Let's talk about today's case. And it is one of those cases that does feel really shocking because the main antagonist in this is female. And we all appreciate that women kill. That goes without saying. I've covered lots of killers who are female on my channel, but it is surprising when you hear about cases where it is women killing men. We understand that women are more likely to practice infanticide, killing babies and children, or even killing one another, but when it comes down to a female in a relationship killing a male, well, that's less expected, and certainly on a statistical basis, compared to their male counterparts killing the female in the relationship, it is far lower statistically for a woman to ever go ahead and kill their partner. And usually when that happens, it doesn't tend to be that that partner is being highly abusive. It tends to be that that partner has killed because potentially they might not have felt there was any other option for them, and so on and so forth. And today's case is going to look at all different angles because there aren't simple answers as far as this one is concerned, without a doubt. And that makes it a little bit more challenging to unpick exactly what played out and why it played out this way. So let's talk about Fiona Beal, the individual who is the actual person accused in this case. She was born on the 16th of December 1973. She was a year 6 teacher at Eastfield Academy in St Albans Close in Northamptonshire. She was, to all intents and purposes, considered a very excellent teacher. She was somebody who was very well liked in teaching, and she was said to be excellent at her job. She was a consummate professional in the classroom. She had been in a relationship, it was very long term, with a guy called Nicholas Billingham, Nick, I'm going to refer to him as. They had been together for 17 years. That's a long time. We're talking about nearly 2 decades. So a very established relationship. And they lived together in Moore Street in Northampton. Nick, he was a self-employed builder. He was somebody who obviously brought a reasonable income in, and they had a relatively, I would say, middle-class life together. But there were certainly cracks in the relationship. He, as an individual, was one of those characters that I will be honest with you about, was very well liked. So there is going to be a picture painted that many people will disagree with when Nick Billingham is concerned, as far as the defense that's used in this particular case. So he was 42 at the time of his death. He was described by people who knew him as a really hard-working guy, a really decent kind of guy. But one of the things that was known through his friends and also through people in his family was that the relationship between him and Beal was problematic. It was very tumultuous, and I would say that she is certainly more the innocent party regarding behaviour in the relationship, just because he'd actually gone off and had affairs, he'd had apparent gambling losses, and also he had some apparent abusive behaviour, as in verbally abusive behaviour. I'm not saying for 1 minute that we're talking about a high-level coercive controller in any way, shape or form. I'm not talking about an individual who's violent in any way, shape or form. He wasn't. I'm just saying that when it comes down to the rudimentary basics of this behaviour within the relationship. Sometimes it's like he wasn't the best person he could have been. I'm sure that she was also not the best person that she could have been. And it's very hard when somebody is dead to tell both sides of the story. The truth is that he may have a completely different picture to paint. He may say that she was indeed incredibly violent and incredibly unfair and incredibly abusive in the relationship, but unfortunately he is not here to tell the tale. And one of the things that we do know about Nick is that he'd actually fathered a child with another woman, and he was also, during the relationship, involved with several extramarital affairs. And understandably, that created a great deal of strain in the relationship, particularly when you think that he fathered a child with another woman. She was called Andrea Farden. That was in 2019, so that was quite recent. Understandably, to have a partner who doesn't just have extramarital or extra relationship affairs, they are also in a scenario where they actually go ahead and father a child, and you haven't got children, for example. That's going to really hurt. And for her to take him back, that states, in my opinion, that she probably didn't have a great deal of self-esteem. I appreciate that people do have extramarital relationships and they make their relationship work. I've worked in relationship therapy, I've worked through things with couples, and to some people it has been the making of their relationship. But ultimately, on the whole, it breaks down relationships because the trust is gone. And you genuinely feel like if they can do that to me, they can do anything. She's taking him back. I would say that that suggests that she probably has a low self-value, low self-esteem, doesn't necessarily believe that she's going to be able to find another relationship that meets her needs and gives her what she deserves. And so it's easier to just have him back in her life, in spite of the wounds that she would suffer beyond a shadow of a doubt, knowing that he has actually had a child elsewhere. And as I said, it was not the only relationship that he had whilst in the relationship with her. Nonetheless, she did choose to take him back, so therefore that's on her. We have to be real about this. If you are in a situation where you are struggling and your partner isn't treating you as you wish to be treated, and you have an opportunity to break free from that partner, but then decide instead to take them back, you've elected to make that choice, and you do have to bear the accountability and responsibility and the consequences of making a choice that, in my opinion, isn't necessarily great for most people when these scenarios unfold. Now we get to the 1st of November 2021, and it's at this point, bear in mind, we're in the COVID crisis, dealing with all of the fallout and collateral of that during this period of time. She speaks to both her employer and to her friends, and she says, listen, me and Nick, we've tested positive for COVID, so obviously we need to isolate. And I'm sure you all remember having to isolate for periods of time. And if you need an excuse, you didn't want to go into work, let's be honest, it's a great one, isn't it? No one's going to question you. Those sketchy little pesky tests you could take that would often say you were positive when you weren't, they were very handy if you wanted a few weeks off school. But at the end of the day, this is what she tells people. Now, in spite of the fact that she's told people that her and Nick have contracted COVID, that same day, that very same day, text messages from Nick were sent and received. And it's clear that he actually had spent the day working on a property that he's going around renovating. So even though she's telling people that they're both positive, he's out working. So it seems potentially that he wasn't aware that she was having these conversations at school with her colleagues and friends there that suggested that she wouldn't be in and he wouldn't be ill because they were isolating. Now, by the evening, his phone was actually using cell data that provided coverage at his home address. So it's clear that he had returned home that evening. Now, a few days after this, Beal ends up telling her friends that she and Nick have split up. So it's gone from, we've got COVID, we obviously need to self-isolate. It's now actually, we've split up. And the reason that they've split up is that he's gone and left her for another woman. So this pattern of unfaithfulness has culminated in him finally leaving her permanently. That's the story that she is telling, even though what she's actually told the school and her colleagues at the school and friends at the school is that she's self-isolating. So indeed, he should be if he's sticking to the rules. So that is a little bit of a red flag. Why leave at a moment when you're not even meant to legally be leaving the home? But equally, there has been a pattern of behaviour with him before, so he could well have gone off with another woman. Although it seems like a very big move to just up and leave without actually telling anybody what you were going to do, because none of his family had been informed of this. He hadn't created some kind of prelude to this event, and suddenly he's gone. Now, what happens is down the line, within a few months, Beal's mental health essentially begins to deteriorate. And I would say this is her undoing. So on the 28th of February, she gets signed off work. And the reason she's signed off work is she's really anxious. She's dealing with a low mood. She's stressed and she's struggling. And it's very clear that her work see that she is indeed struggling. They're supportive. They sign her off, give her some space and time to heal, to recuperate. She then leaves her home address. She rents a cabin in Kendal in the Lake District, gorgeous area of the world in England. Genuinely, the Lake District is just beautiful. And if you do need to recuperate, it would make perfect sense because you're surrounded by the most gorgeous countryside. And also you just feel a sense of peace when you're there. And again, that would make sense. This is somebody who's struggling with a mental health. It's good for her to go and have some time out somewhere quiet, particularly when you consider that she's suddenly being thrown into this scenario where her partner, the man that she's been sharing her life with for 17 years, has yet again apparently failed her and has removed himself from the relationship. So she's got a lot to deal with. There, she ends up sending messages to family members. And understandably, when you know somebody, you know when things often are going wrong for them. It's just the way they act. It's the way they behave around you. It's even the style that they speak to you online with. Because we expect people to stick to a certain pattern in the way that they actually address us. And when that changes, it just alerts you. There's just this instinct within you psychologically and also intuition-wise that says something is going on here. And so these family members are really concerned. They're thinking, you know what? This guy's left. She's by herself in the Lake District. She's been acting a little bit odd, a little bit off. There's something worrying us. And because of that, they start getting really concerned. And that's the build up to what's going to play out, because really it's that concern that starts to unravel this horrible crime. Now we get to the 8th of March 2022, and this is when Beal basically reaches fever pitch regarding the consideration that people have for her situation and problems. So people are starting to really get concerned because she's just acting strangely. And she texts her head teacher, so her employer, and she just says things aren't right. Now that head teacher does exactly what any decent, good professional would do who cares deeply for their staff. They inform the police. They want to get a welfare check because there is something about the way that Beal is acting. One, she's off work with distress, anxiety, depression, but also she's kind of holed herself up somewhere that is away from where she lives. And now she's texting things that sound a little bit ominous. So there is a cause for concern there that maybe Beal would harm herself. So the police then go. This is on the 12th of March 2022, and they find her at that lodge in a holiday park in the Lake District. Now she engages fully with the police. She says she's okay. And bear in mind, she's an adult. She's over 18 years of age. She's not exhibiting at that point anything that makes them determine that she's got some kind of mental health issue that's on the decline and she could harm herself. At that point, they would act differently. But she presents as somebody who has capacity and she expresses that she's okay. So the police are really satisfied that, yeah, she might have been sad, but she's okay. They don't have to be that concerned about her, at least on a mental health level, to the degree where she might cause herself some harm. So they leave her. But bear in mind, how would that feel for Beal? All of a sudden, she's in a situation where she's thinking, people are starting to look at what's going on with me. And if you have a conscience, because not all killers have a conscience. Many killers have got such low empathy and a low capacity for guilt. Let's just think about the ventromedial prefrontal cortex of the brain. So that's the area that's really important for dealing with guilt and dealing with empathy. So empathy is a big connector with you and I want to understand how you feel. And then guilt, well, that's really important. It's an adjuster of my behavior. I don't want to feel that again. It's awful, and so on and so forth. Now, in normal, typical humans, that coordinates and communicates effectively with the amygdala, the instinct area of the brain, which is also responsible for anxiety and guilt, mediating that. If they don't communicate effectively, it means I can act in an immoral way. I can act outside the realms of normality and be fine. My conscience doesn't prick. But if I'm not somebody with that mindset, let's say I'm not completely psychopathic, I can do something that I believe in the moment makes sense, and then after it festers. And it really breaches every boundary that I've ever created for myself, and it goes against everything I believed I was capable of, and instead presents me with this new capacity for harm, and it's terrifying. And over time, the guilt and the fear and all of those things just starts to swallow that person whole. And I think that this is the tipping point where she starts to see police officers getting involved. It's that sense of impending doom, which, to add to the anxiety, the stress, the mental health issues, is problematic to say the very least. We get to the 15th of March 2022. Now, bear in mind, it's not just the head teacher who's been concerned about Beal. So there are lots of escalating concerns for her well-being, family getting in contact. People are saying there is just something wrong. We know that she needs checking on. So the police then, rightly so, revisit the lodge, and the family and the friends are correct. They actually find Beal in the bath, and it's very clear from what they see that she's been trying to cut her wrists. So this is essentially a suicide attempt. And they also found what looked like a suicide note. So this is very serious, and clearly it's imperative that she's taken to the Royal Lancaster Infirmary and that she actually speaks to a psychiatrist. And at this point, she is indeed detained under the Mental Health Act. And the reason for that is they'll need to assess her to make sure that she isn't going to be any more harm to herself or somebody else. That's what you need to do in those circumstances. And they do need to understand whether she does have capacity to be walking the streets when she's clearly dealing with something that has been deeply upsetting for her to such a degree that she's tried to take her life. So now the police have made sure she's safe. They then conduct a search of the cabin that she's been renting, and they find a journal. And it's really, really scary what they find, because first of all, it's written by Beal, and it shows what they consider a wholly different side to her personality. So they're reading this, and it actually looks as if Beal is discussing her in two parts, as if she has a split personality, they say. Now, split personality doesn't exist anymore. We call it DID, dissociative identity disorder. But nonetheless, this is how they refer to it. The police are looking, it's like there are two people here, and that she's got this alter ego named Tulip 22. And it's chilling what's been written. So first of all, it's chilling because you're seeing one person who's identifying as two selves, and that's quite unusual. It's quite strange to actually be in a scenario where you're actually looking at that and seeing that it feels like this person genuinely seems to be inhabiting two selves. But also it's the content. So this is really detailed account of how she planned and killed somebody. Now, it didn't contain the name of the person that she'd murdered, but it provokes something as far as the police are concerned, because it feels really unusual that anybody would write this kind of content without there being some meaning behind it. And even if that meaning is just this person is really struggling with their mental health, we need to bring this to the surface because they're clearly struggling. Nonetheless, whatever is behind it, it provokes a reaction. And the police actually find one of the entries in the handwritten journal providing what essentially is Beal's confession. It says, "I have to confess." Okay, here goes. So this is October 2021, it's written. She writes, "He spat on me and threatened me during sex. I knew then that," this bit's been redacted because it's a particular person's name, "had been telling the truth. I thought about leaving, but the things he said and did fueled my dark side. I call her Tulip 22. She's reckless, fearless, and efficient, ruthless. I started plotting as Tulip 22 after he'd gone to bed. I could no longer sleep in the bed due to my breathing being so loud, or I moved too much, or I was snoring, etc., etc. I would go downstairs after sex, and even when I was unwell. I got so used to sleeping downstairs and waited for him to go to bed, and then got high and let Tulip 22 out. I knew I couldn't let him get away with it. Halloween sealed it. He was vile. I sat on the kitchen floor and wept as I witnessed the abuse I'd allowed to happen. I allowed so much bad to happen. That night I planned. COVID rules meant I had a guaranteed 10-day isolation period from positive symptoms. I called Claire on the Monday and said we'd tested positive and had symptoms. He went to work. Tulip 22 smoked and planned. I'd planned it mentally so many times before. The knife cut my dressing gown pocket. Then she writes on Monday, November the 1st. I'd smoked all day. I had a bath. I left the water in. He'd been pushing for sex. I encouraged the bath with the incentive of sex afterwards. Whilst he was in the bath, I kept the knife in my dressing gown pocket and hid it in the drawer next to the bed. I bought a chisel, bin bag, and cable ties up too. I got him to wear an eye mask. It was harder than I thought it would be. Hiding his body was bad. Moving a body is so much more difficult than it looks on TV. I started to believe the cover story. Flashes interrupted. So she's literally written about the fact that firstly, she's planned and premeditated a killing. Secondly, that she's struggled with the feelings around it, but gone ahead and done it anyway. That finally, she goes ahead and actually carries it out. And it's all in black and white, more than black and white. Black and white, and in her handwriting, in her journal. Also recorded in that same journal was his last words. And apparently, his last words were to ask Beal why. Beal said, "My last words to him when he asked why was that he wasn't going to do it to another female, what he'd done to me." So she's basically saying that yes, she planned it, yes, she premeditated it, yes, she killed him, yes, she moved his body, it was more difficult than she imagined, but he deserved it. Basically, you're not going to treat another woman the way that you've treated me. But what an extreme reaction. If we're looking at it in that context, in the cold light of day, she is saying, you have betrayed me, you've upset me, you've been nasty to me, and therefore you deserve to die. It's such an overcorrection of what's required in this situation, which is there's the door, Nick, walk through it. Now, understandably, the police then need to search her house. So Northamptonshire police get contacted, and they initially, when they're hearing about these journal entries, are saying, well, this won't be true. This is just the musings of somebody who's very unwell and is probably just writing things down, and it bears no truth at all. But clearly, there could be a potential after all. Nick hasn't been seen, so they decide that they do want to go and search her home. And they go into Beal's home, and at that point it's pretty obvious from the absolute get-go that something terrible has happened in that house. First of all, they find a blood-stained mattress in the basement. Also, they find an apparent blood stain on the bed frame in the master bedroom. So this is all fitting in to what's been read in the journal. I mean, literally, it's a blow-by-blow reality of what we would imagine played out. If he thought he was going to have sex, and then she tied him up, and then she murdered him in that situation, there's going to be blood all over the bed frame. There's definitely going to be blood all over the master bedroom and the mattress. They also found cable ties straight out of what we see in serial killer situations. So the police haven't just found these very incriminating and very terrifying items. They've also realised that that fits with the narrative that's been read in the journals, and now they realise Nick hasn't been seen or spoken to by telephone since that afternoon of the 1st of November 2021, which correlates with exactly what she's saying in the journal. So it doesn't take long for the police to realise that they are now dealing with not only a crime scene, but a crime scene that may relate to a murder. They begin the search for Nick Billingham. It's on the 19th of March, 2022. It's 4 months after he went missing. Nick's partly mummified, in fact, remains were found in the back garden of their shared house. Nick had been buried in this makeshift grave. It was at the side of the property, and it comprised of concrete mixed by Beal. Also, there was what was referred to as a de facto coffin that was made of breeze blocks and timber and sheets, and his grave had basically been topped off with multiple bags of compost. She'd done a relatively good job of actually disguising the body and the area in which it had been deposited. So understandably, they've got a body, they've got what seems to be a written confession, they've got Beal, and so understandably on the 21st of March 2022, she is charged with murder at Northampton Magistrates Court, and she was remanded immediately in custody because they know you cannot have a killer walking around, and there would be no bail set because she's a danger possibly to herself and certainly potentially to other people as well, based on what I've just told you. The police then go ahead and gather a timeline of the cover-up because they're interested to know just how premeditated this is and to the lengths that she's gone to prepare what she's carried out and also cover it up. Now, in Beal's journal, she admitted to planning the murder. She pretended they both tested positive for COVID, so she got that 10 days where she could conceal his body. That was clearly very premeditated. Also, she then takes his phone, and there's this pattern of false texts and false actions throughout November and December 2021 with the idea of making it seem that Nick has left of his own volition and he's absolutely fine. So Beal just continues to peddle as well that story of Nick leaving her for someone else. So he's the person who's at fault. He's the person who's betrayed her. She's the victim. And she's been accepting all of that sadness that people felt for her, all of that empathy, all the while knowing that she executed her apparent lover and buried him in the back garden. And like I said, when your conscience doesn't align with your actions, at times it can cripple you. And that's what seems to have happened here. She's been crippled by the reality of her actions. For all Tulip 22 apparently was the one who's responsible for it, she knows what she did. She knows why she did it. She's written it down, and it started to literally disintegrate her mental health. On the 23rd of December 2021, get this, Nick's own mother, somebody called Yvonne Valentine, visited the house. She was chatting with Beal, and this, bear in mind, is under the guise of this casual drink before Christmas, and Beal tells her that Nick's moved out. Not only has he moved out, he's gone off with another woman, and apparently she made up some very, very elaborate stories about this. So she's really adding all of this information that we know is absolute BS, and she's speaking to his mother about his indiscretions, about his betrayal, whilst having a casual drink with her. Now just think about that. This is the woman who birthed this man, and she has no idea that just feet from where she is sat drinking with her son's killer, his body lies. Beal used Nick's phone, sending messages to his mum on the 30th of December 2021, said he'd been to see Manchester United at Old Trafford, that he was looking forward to the new year. So she's going this far to try to cover her tracks, to show signs of life for this man that she's murdered. And there were New Year goodwill messages that are sent to Nick's phone by his friends and family, and she, of course, responds as Nick. Then on the 6th of February 2022, Yvonne, who's obviously concerned, she's not seen him over Christmas. She's heard from him in text, but there have been no phone calls, there's been no presents, and she's concerned. So she sends a message to him, says, "Are you all right?" And Beal sends a reply on the 11th of February, pretending that she is Nick, saying, "All good, kiss." Now that very same day, Beal purchased an A5 lined notebook, the same notebook that she then wrote her confession in. So again, doesn't that just provoke that reaction of knowledge where you can see that beginning of the spiral of the mental health just starting to completely unravel? Because as she's pretending that he's alive, as she's pretending there are signs of life, as people who love him are getting in contact with him, and she's pretending to be him, ultimately trying to live the fantasy where she's innocent and none of this happened, trying to deny that she's gone ahead and killed him, is very difficult when she is holding his phone, speaking to his loved ones, and just completely pretending to be the man that she's murdered. And again, it means that she can't avoid it. She's being confronted with it time and time and time and time again. And as the time moves on and people get more concerned, she knows her days are potentially numbered, and that adds to the stress. Now, that particular text message to his mother, that was the last use of Nick's phone to send a message to anyone. An Apple Note, actually located in his phone with the same date, had the words, "I am beginning this book to you on Saturday the 12th of February 2022. It's been 3 months and 12 days. I am not a total monster. I know what I did." So the very fact that she's acknowledging, "I'm not a total monster, I know what I did," I would say that it's very likely Beal isn't a total monster, but that does not deny what she did was utterly monstrous. But you can see that she's talking to herself in this way and also talking to him, because even though he's dead, she's beginning to acknowledge the fact that her conscience is struggling with the actions to such a degree she's having to cathartically try to process it. And it's very much a foreboding, isn't it? I've done this, I know I've done this, I know what that makes me, and I don't know how to manage that. And the first trial actually began on 13th of March 2023 at Northampton Crown Court, but the case actually collapsed. That was for legal reasons, and that collapsed on the 22nd of June. That was after more than 3 months. So we can imagine there must have been a hell of a lot of stress for the prosecution, defence, and of course for her, because 3 months is a long period of time, and for that to just ultimately come out to nothing, that's going to be problematic for everyone, as well as the taxpayer, because it costs quite a lot of money. We get to the second trial. So The person presiding over this is Mark Lucraft. He's the judge. The prosecution was led by Hugh Davies, and Beal, at the beginning of this, had admitted to manslaughter of Nick, but she had denied murder. She was basically saying, yes, I did kill him, not going to deny I killed him, but the reasons that I killed him were not something that would lead to it being a murder. It would be a case more of diminished responsibility, an individual who was struggling and dealing with an abusive relationship and just reacting to that, thus killing this person, but not in a manner that suggests it was murderous. The trial began at the Old Bailey in London, one of the most famous courts in the land, and it began on the 19th of April 2024, so a very, very recent case. Now, the prosecution, I would say, had an incredibly strong case. I genuinely do. They brought in forensic witnesses, and they said that Nick had died whilst cable tied to the bed in the master bedroom, and also he was wearing an eye mask. Now, just think about that for a minute. We're talking about a man who believes that his lover is taking him for some sex play. Maybe it's been one of those things he's been hoping for because he might have been a little bit frustrated. Their relationship may not have been going as well as he'd have liked. And then suddenly she seems very intent on intimacy and that's exciting. And then she's throwing in the idea that he's going to get tied up and she's going to blindfold him. And he's probably thinking to himself, come on, this is great. This is not what I expected this evening. But all the while, he has no idea that as he puts that eye mask on, as he has his hands and arms cable tied to the bed, that is going to be the last thing he ever does. Again, because the very person he thinks is about to have sex with him is literally going to kill him. And the forensic people who looked at his injuries, the autopsy, etc., said the reason he died was he bled to death after she severed his jugular vein in a single strike. Davies, for the prosecution, said this was a controlled execution. Now, the fact that she went for the jugular vein, the fact that it was one foul swoop, we're not talking about lots and lots of stab marks, we're not talking about a protracted killing. This was a killing that was done very quickly, very effectively. And that is chilling to the bone. It certainly doesn't seem of somebody out of their mind. Because bear in mind, there is no good way to kill anyone. Of course there isn't. It's terrible no matter how somebody is murdered. But often when it comes down to relational issues, when somebody snaps, you'll often see what we call overkill, where it was completely unnecessary to keep stabbing that person. But the rage in them, the anger in them, the desperateness for them to know that that person is never going to come back from the injuries means that they stab and stab and stab and stab again. That's not what happened in this scenario. So after he's bled out and died, Beal then wrapped Nick, who bear in mind was 5'11" and weighed at least 14 stone, in plastic, so she's prepared. Then she drags him downstairs. Apparently that destroyed the banisters because obviously he's a big guy. And then she buried him in the back garden, all the while knowing that she had this 10-day grace period where she could get away with it. Now, obviously, one of the things that would indicate somebody had been killed in there to the naked eye would be blood spatter in the bedroom. But what they found was that she painted over it and also the furniture had been rearranged. And the reason for that was because she tried to obscure the view of Nick's burial site in the side of their house. So they lived in this 3-bedroom terraced house, and it was basically the side return of their 3-bedroom terraced house where she'd placed him. So again, she's trying to avoid seeing, feeling, acknowledging, experiencing anything that takes her back to the origin of that killing. She's done it, she planned to do it, but whether she feels a level of satisfaction afterwards, well, the way that she's acting doesn't seem to suggest that she's got a great deal of peace from the action. So Beal also moved the blood-stained mattress, which is a big problem. He bled out very, very badly, and she moved that, as I said, to the basement of the home. That's where the police later found it. When the prosecution bring in what she did regarding the burial, it is very, very telling, because this is not somebody who's in a rush. This is not somebody who's desperately out of their mind and doesn't have a clue what they're doing. No. His grave, quote, was of an extraordinary construction of makeshift layers of sheeting, concrete, and Beal had mixed a de facto coffin with sides and a top of breeze blocks, timber sheets, all topped it off with multiple bags of compost. She added a pot plant for decorative effect. That's what the prosecution said. They went on to say the body was partly decomposed, indeed mummified on its back. Ancient Egyptians buried pharaohs with their treasure. Nick Billingham was unceremoniously entombed with his building waste and unwanted bed sheets and blankets. It demonstrated nothing but complete contempt. Also, they brought in CCTV footage, which was relatively damning because that CCTV footage was from B&Q. And 12 days after she had murdered Nick, she actually hid Nick's van on a side street a mile from the home. She then went to B&Q. She bought materials that she could bury him with. She bought 10 50-litre bags of compost, 10 large bags of Cotswold stone, and a large grey plastic truck. She knew what she was doing. She put a lot of thought into this, and her intention clearly wasn't to get caught. Beal also used Nick's Amazon account to buy other items. This included a large fleece blanket, a vibrator. Sorry guys, when I was researching this and I came across the large fleece blanket, it's like, okay, you can wrap a body in that. She even got a herb grinder for weed because she likes smoking the old cannabis. But the vibrator, I don't know how that sits with me. One imagines that if you're dealing with your conscience literally breaking to pieces because you've murdered your partner, the last thing you're thinking about is the odd orgasm, is it? I just, concerns me, worries me. I don't know why it worries me, but I'm like, why are you thinking of anything sexual when you've murdered your partner? Also, to add to that, she was repeatedly using Nick's phone to watch pornography. So she's, shall we say, pleasuring herself with said vibrator whilst watching said pornography of her partner's now dead phone. It's just odd. And again, there's two sides definitely to this woman. Don't get me wrong, I don't think she's suffering from DID. I'll talk about that shortly. But there does seem to be two sides. So you've got Beal, the planned, premeditated, cold, cool, calculating killer. You've got her. And she also is the person who you think personality-wise is responsible for that side of a nature, buying the vibrator, using pornography on his phone to pleasure herself. Then you've got the other side, which is the shred of humanity, the chink of light through the darkness that I'm talking about, which is the person who's got the conscience, to some degree the person writing the admissions, the person who's losing a mind. But it is very much a tale of two sides, this story. But it really is just something that sits really poorly with me when I imagine that this man is literally in the ground not far away from where she's pleasuring herself with a vibrator she bought using his money whilst using his phone to view it. Very unsettling indeed. So understandably, the prosecution have got a pretty strong case. They also talk about where the beginning of the end was concerned as far as they were concerned, how it ended up that she became somebody who was noted by the police as a potential perpetrator of a killing, and also how they turned up the body, etc., how that played out. They said that in February 2022, it began with PCSO Naomi Morella. She was the person who'd been tasked with trying to contact Nick after his van had been found abandoned, because that van was found abandoned under some trees, and those trees happened to need to be pruned. So this is why they're trying to locate him. At this point, the PCSO goes to Beal's, knocks on the door, basically looking for Nick. Beal can't tell her where Nick is. And she said that at that point when she knocked on the door and it was answered by Beal, she had an expression on her face that she said she could only describe as a kind of shock. She said that Beal told her that she doubted Nick was in Northampton at all, and that she had actually tried to reach him by phone herself and he must have changed his number. So she's given herself a story that he's left, she doesn't know where he is. Now, the timing of that PCSO's visit happens to apparently coincide with the decline in Beal's mental health. So the prosecution portray this as the moment, that sliding doors moment where she starts to panic and then she retreats to the Lake District, which becomes her undoing. After the prosecution has given their case and put it forward, they talk about the victim impact statement. He read a victim impact statement that was written by Nick's mother, Yvonne Ballantyne. And obviously Yvonne is a victim in this case enormously. Yvonne said, "I want you to spend the rest of your life going over what you did to Nick, the pain and suffering that you put him through when you killed him, and the total disregard for him as a human being when you buried him like he was a piece of rubbish in his own back garden. I want you to remember that he will always be loved and he will always be missed. You faced judgment in court, and you will now have to face God's judgment for eternity. You are pure evil. And bear in mind, Yvonne was having a drink with this woman before Christmas, and she was in a scenario where she felt probably sorry for Beal because her son had ran off with some other woman. And all the while, Beal knew that she'd killed this man, the son of Yvonne. And she let that story play out. And it is just so offensive to your sensibilities to imagine this poor mother not realising how much of the wool had been pulled over her eyes at that moment in time. And of course, even though the prosecution have got a very strong case, the defence come in with what they believe is a reason as to the behaviour of Beal. So the defence is ran by Wheeler, who said that Beal was of previous good character. I hate it when that happens. This idea that if you've got previous good character, that should mitigate your actions. It's like, okay, previous good character could just mean you got away with stuff effectively. Think about serial killers. They had previous good character, apparently, quite a lot of them, and then it was found that there were bodies located in the back garden. Even though they may have had previous good character, it's usually because they've just been very chameleon-like and got away with things. She was noted as being a fantastic teacher. They brought that in. Apparently at her primary school, she was very, very much celebrated. And this same barrister said, listen, she's had a really long history of depression, and Nick contributed to that. So he said that she'd be put down continuously. Apparently Nick called her old, washed out, called her fat, asked her why she was wearing makeup. And when she actually complained about how he was treating her, he replied, well, I don't hit you. So they argue that basically she's been a very abused woman with this prolonged psychological and emotional abuse, all by Nick. So her barrister basically claimed that Nick was very domineering, that he was very abusive, and that this just ultimately wore Beal down over the years until she was mentally broken. They said that her mental health issues were also a really significant reason and a significant factor that led to the murder. So her defence basically highlighted that this deteriorating mental health and the influence, they put it, of her alter ego Tulip 22, which allegedly emerged under stress and during cannabis use, was the reason that she finally snapped and killed him. But she didn't snap and kill him, did she, guys? Let's just throw it out there. She didn't snap and kill him. She planned to kill him pretty effectively. She was really effective at disposing of the body as well. She had literally had a prelude to killing him. It's not like she was in a moment of passion, lost it, and murdered him. Or, shall we say, was even guilty of manslaughter in that case, where she genuinely did lose it, and it wasn't to do with her wanting to kill him, it was just a result of some horrendous argument. That's not what happened. Now, I said I'd talk about DID, just for some of you who may not understand what dissociative identity disorder is. That was previously known as multiple personality disorder. So it's a very complex psychological condition. Not that you think that if you go on TikTok. Honestly, let me tell you, people on TikTok who are identifying themselves as DID, and there are a lot of them. It's one of the rarest particular disorders. Also, many people don't even know whether it's real. But I come down on the side of this being a real condition, DID. And it's where individuals have different alters. So they're usually not very aware of who else is within their particular, shall we say, family of alters. And it can be deeply, deeply devastating for those who have to deal with it, because they get themselves into situations that they don't feel that they understood, that because they weren't actually computing reality at the time, because one of their other alters is leading the situation at the moment that they're engaged in that behaviour, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very upsetting. When you go on TikTok and you see these people who are introducing each of their alters as if they're actually in the room, and they're putting all these different clothes on, and they're doing all these cute, it's BS. Absolute BS. Those people certainly have something wrong with them, like compulsive lying would be one of them, but they're not DID. And I know that some of you who come on here may know somebody who has DID, and just how devastating and disorientating and problematic and deeply upsetting it can be for them. So it's a very serious, very complex psychological condition. And basically it's characterized by the presence of two or more distinct personality states or identities or alters within a single individual. They might have their own names, they might have their own ages, their own histories, their own characteristics. Often it comes from really serious childhood trauma. So imagine being a child, let's say you're being horribly sexually abused. The brain is very adept at helping you to survive, because this is what it is, it's a survival strategy. So you are facing immense pain, immense fear, immense trauma. The brain needs you to cope, needs you to make it through. So it fractures that sense of self. It takes that 5-year-old child who's struggling and suffering and it puts them somewhere else. It's why people say that they don't feel part of their body at times. It's why they suffer at times from derealization and depersonalization, because they literally feel like they're outside of their own body. And that's because the brain took that center core self, the absolute core of who you are, and it projects you somewhere else so that you can survive. And then a personality is developed to deal with the trauma, to face the trauma. And that's what the belief is regarding DID. It's a protective survival mechanism that fractures the selves so that the core self, the bit that needs to be protected, can be protected. And it's very much linked to physical, sexual, emotional abuse. And people with DID can go through massive memory gaps. Often, as I said, they're not aware of their different personalities, although on TikTok, they're all aware. They've all got their own clothes and fashion sense. I'm surprised people aren't putting out ranges of clothes for all of the different alters. Also, often they're not aware of the actions taken by the personalities. And when we treat DID, usually it's psychotherapy, it's my field, we do that. And the premise of it is to integrate the identities and then address the underlying trauma. That's the goal of therapy. So this is what the defense is talking about. However, we have a few problems here, don't we? Number one, she's been a very effective teacher. It's not been something that anybody's noticed before. She's been very good at what she does. So she's not had these interruptions that we'd expect to see with DID. She's never actually had a mental health classification that demonstrates that she is DID. And also, it feels like she was very aware of Tulip 22, albeit that she wears her as a mask once she's stoned off her head on cannabis, and allows that part of herself, even though she's very aware of it, to act in ways that fundamentally she wouldn't normally act, according to her at least. Now, something happens during this case. Bear in mind, the defense are going for this idea that she didn't mean to kill him, it's manslaughter. But on the 26th of April 2024, in a dramatic turn of events, she changes the plea and she admits to the court that she did indeed murder Nick Billingham. Now that's massive. And the reason she'll have done that is she'll have been sitting there listening to the very strong prosecution, to the fact that she literally wrote a confession, to the knowledge that she's on CCTV buying the goods that she then buried Nick with. And she's going to know my sentence is going to be even longer unless I say, yes, I did this. She's banged to rights on every single level. This is a slam dunk case for the prosecution, a slam dunk case. Now, I appreciate that I cannot quantify or validate or clarify truly whether Nick was abusive towards her. But we are not talking about a woman who has not got capacity here. She's somebody who can plan and very effectively execute both figuratively and literally this crime and this killing. So she is not somebody who's desperate. She has relationships with people who care for her, including Nick's mother. There are people who could give her exit strategies. And yes, Nick may have not been very nice at times, but there again, in his defense, because he's not here to defend himself, how many times have our partners said things that aren't very nice? I try to be quite a peaceful character. I've said nasty things to my husband, and he's said nasty things to me at times when we're stressed, when we're scared. These things happen. And if you take the worst of what's been said in your relationship and say it in court, you can be shown to be a pretty horrible person, if only that's noted. But when you bring it down to, well, we can say all of that, but if it only happened for 0.5% of our relationship, actually we've had a really strong, wonderful relationship together, then it totally changes how you would view those words that are spoken. Look, it's not okay to call somebody fat. It's not okay to say to somebody, why are you wearing that makeup? It's not okay to say that somebody's old, tired, washed out. They're horrible things, but equally, People say things that are very nasty when they're drunk or when they're exhausted or when they're in a row with you. It's not about saying it's okay. It's about bringing it back into the human condition. It's part of what many people do. Not everyone. There was somebody listening to me now saying, I've never uttered a word of anything negative to anybody in my life. And you're probably floating on a crowd. And there'll also be like a very lovely little circle of light above your head because you will be angelic if you've managed to do that. But for us mere mortals, there are moments, just moments in our lives where we say and do things that we regret. So Nick is not here to defend himself, and he is 100% the victim in this case. And do I see her as a coercively controlled, absolutely downtrodden, downbeaten woman? No, I really don't. I think that probably she was unhappy in her relationship. I think she was very resentful of the fact that he had a child with another person, and she had a right to feel that. But also, if you stay in a relationship or take a man back or a woman back when they've been adulterous, that's your problem when the relationship doesn't work out or becomes more problematic in your mind or builds in resentment because you made a decision to say, it's okay, I forgive you. Either forgive them and move on together or end the relationship. They're your choices. Beal didn't do that. She took him back and she bubbled and bubbled and festered and festered. And in the end, those bubbles and festering and rottenness within her nature came to the surface in the most barbaric, gruesome and tragic of ways. After she had pled guilty, there was a sentencing. So it was a 2-day hearing for the sentencing. Again, that took part at the Old Bailey. She showed no emotion at all during this process. And I think that's really sad because I think that the way that human beings relate to individuals who've been found guilty is to look at them and make a judgment based on what you see in those moments when they're realizing that they are no longer going to be a free person, and also when they realize the magnitude of what they've done. Even when somebody has done the most horrific things, when you see them in pain, when you see them saying sorry, it doesn't always ring true, but many of us can acknowledge that there are moments where these people genuinely see the error of their ways. It's too late. It doesn't make them forgivable. It means that you want them to serve their sentence, but you kind of see there is a shred of hope. But there was nothing. She just was stoic. On the 30th of May 2024, she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years to be served. So she's got a stern sentence, and rightfully so. Nick was horribly and brutally slain in his own home, in his own bed. And the judge in the sentencing remarks was very powerful, said, not only did you kill Nick Billingham, you intended to do so. And having moved and buried his body in the garden, you lied to his mother, to his numerous friends and family, as well as your own family, about what you had done. The judge then went to talk about those text messages and the cover-up and said, these can only be described as truly callous.
I do not wish there to be any misunderstanding as the sentence passed. As with the passing of any life sentence, it is that, a life sentence, in your case life imprisonment. In determining the minimum term, the court is not saying that you will be released at that date. The sentence is one of life imprisonment. The minimum term is the term you must serve before the parole board can consider your case and consider whether you are someone where it is safe for you then to be released on licence or not. The earliest that can happen is in 20 years, less the 801 days that you've been on remand. On my calculations, 17 years and 294 days. If the information which I have been provided with as to the number of days on remand proves to be inaccurate, then the prosecution or defence must notify the court so the case can be relisted to correct the calculation as soon as possible, and in any event within 56 days. A person sentenced to life who is released remains on licence for the rest of their natural life. If the statutory surcharge applies in this case, the appropriate order may be drawn up. You may go down.
The lead detective statement following Beal's sentencing went outside of the court and made a statement to the public just saying how grotesque, how premeditated, how pre-planned this murder was and how brutal Nick's death was. And Nick's family actually stood around that officer with pictures of Nick to honour him and to remind people that the story that they'd been told by Beal, as far as they were concerned, was just fabrication and fantasy. We have to remember that someone who is so capable of being so absolutely brutal someone so planned and premeditated in the killing who can so coldly execute someone, can we really believe them? Can we really stand here and think that she was some downtrodden woman? It just feels to me like we're dealing with an individual who wanted him to pay for what he had done to her. And she made him pay in literally the most brutal way possible. For Nick's mum, she has that memory of sharing space, of sharing a drink with Fiona Beal, and that trusting that actually she was the victim as her son had betrayed her, leaving her for another woman. All the while taking sips from a glass, unknown to her, feet away from her son's rotting body. It is incomprehensible for me to even try to understand how that poor woman feels. How that poor woman must feel every single night when she goes to bed, imagining that boys for her, because they're always boys and babies to us mothers, how her son's last moments must have been at the hands of what she would consider is undoubtedly a monster, whether you call her Fiona Beal or Tulip 22. What we know is she used cannabis and drug use and getting high and writing her feelings of frustration as an excuse to put them into action. And because of that, Nick Billingham lost his life. I hope you've heard about this case and have got some more to tell me on it, because obviously it was quite hard turning up some of the details. If you do know anything more about this, please do add in the comments below. This is about Nick being given a legacy as opposed to Fiona Beal being allowed to just talk about him being this abusive human being that really there's very little evidence of. It's to bring back into sharp focus the fact that sometimes women kill, and they don't kill because they're victims, they kill because they're perpetrators. I'll see you again next time, guys. Be safe.